Imagine Pope Francis, a figure commanding global attention, walking through the serene, yet meticulously kept, Vatican gardens. It's easy to picture him absorbed in reflection, perhaps seeking a moment of quiet communion amidst the schedule packed with spiritual duties and weighty world affairs. The very air of the Vatican speaks of history, doctrine, and intricate protocol. But sometimes, profound moments don't arrive through grand pronouncements or diplomatic meetings. Occasionally, they emerge from the smallest, most unexpected encounters, breaking through the expected order of things. This is the beginning of such a story, an intimate, heartwarming narrative centered around the Pope and a small, vulnerable stray cat who wandered into his world. This account delves into themes that resonate deeply within the human spirit: the simple, unadorned power of compassion, the surprising depth of connection possible between species, and the discovery of unconditional love in the most humble circumstances. It's a tale of hope, unfolding within the ancient walls of the Vatican, a place synonymous with tradition and ceremony, yet also, as this story suggests, a place where spontaneous acts of kindness, echoing the Pope's consistent calls for mercy, can change everything. We'll explore how a chance meeting with a wounded feline reportedly led to a unique bond, revealing a deeply human and relatable side to Pope Francis, one that aligns with his known emphasis on caring for the overlooked and marginalized. The story of the Pope and this cat, later known as Pio, has circulated widely, capturing imaginations and touching hearts far beyond the Catholic faithful. It speaks volumes to animal lovers, of course, but its appeal is broader, resonating with anyone who believes in the transformative power of empathy and the significance of seemingly small lives in a complex world. It raises gentle questions about our relationship with the creatures who share our planet and highlights how simple acts can ripple outwards with unforeseen consequences. What happens when a leader of the Catholic Church extends his care to one of God's smallest creatures? How does such a relationship begin, and what impact might it have, not just on the man, but on the very institution surrounding him? The answers lie in a journey that started with a faint sound carried on the wind through those historic gardens. It began, as profound stories often do, with a quiet moment and an unexpected meeting, demanding an immediate, heartfelt response. A meow in the gardens, rescue and refuge. That heartfelt response wasn't long in coming. The narrative unfolds on a day like many others within the Vatican City's tranquil grounds. Pope Francis, seeking respite amidst the demands of his office, strolled through the lush Vatican gardens. It was then, interrupting the peaceful silence, that a sound reached him, described as a faint meow, almost imperceptible, like a sigh carried on the breeze. Curiosity piqued, he paused, searching among the greenery. There, nestled amongst the bushes, was the source, a small, pitifully thin, gray cat, one paw clearly injured and causing it pain. Without apparent hesitation, moved by an instinct of immediate compassion, the Pope carefully bent down, an action perhaps made slightly more difficult by age, yet undertaken without pause. He gently gathered the trembling creature into the folds of his papal cloak. The little animal, though visibly frightened, didn't resist the embrace. Seeing the need for proper care, Francis spotted a nearby gardener and called him over, asking simply, "Could you help me take him to the Vatican infirmary?" The request, though respectfully received with a nod, clearly surprised the workman, unaccustomed to such scenes. Reaching the entrance to the designated area, they encountered a moment of protocol-driven hesitation. The security guards, while respectful, reminded the pontiff of the regulations: "Your Holiness, animals are not allowed in this area." But Francis, with a gentle smile that reportedly softened the interaction, invoked the spirit of his namesake, Saint Francis of Assisi, renowned for his love of all creatures, even preaching to birds. "How can I ignore this little one?" he responded tenderly. His simple appeal, rooted in a deep tradition of care for creation, was enough. They let him pass. Inside the small infirmary, the cat was placed onto an examination table. Offered water and food, it refused both, overwhelmed by fear and pain, its tired eyes fixed warily on the Pope. "He's scared," Francis murmured, understanding dawning in his expression. Recognizing that medical care alone wasn't enough, he took an old towel, settled himself down on the floor, bridging the gap between his high office and the vulnerable creature, and gently invited the cat onto his lap. Minutes passed in quiet patience. Then, finally, a soft, tentative purr began, a fragile vibration signaling that the wall of fear had been breached by this unexpected, humane gesture of profound kindness and trust. Safe for the moment, the little feline's journey was just beginning, its future within these ancient walls still uncertain. From stray to sanctuary, naming P.O. and finding a home. That initial spark of trust, ignited on the infirmary floor, marked the beginning of the stray cat's tentative journey toward healing and belonging within the heart of the Vatican. Under the gentle care of the veterinarian, identified in the narrative as Lorenzo, and bolstered perhaps by the quiet prayers Pope Francis offered, the small feline slowly began to mend. Lorenzo's initial prognosis was reportedly guarded. The cat was very weak, prompting Francis to simply place a comforting hand on the small body and close his eyes in supplication. He later encouraged those in the papal residence to offer a silent thought for the creature, underlining his belief that a life is a life, no matter the size. As the cat recovered, it transitioned from the infirmary into the papal apartments themselves, gradually becoming a fixture in the Pope's daily life. However, introducing a stray cat into the formal environment of the Apostolic Palace wasn't without its ripples. Not everyone was immediately charmed. Whispers reportedly circulated among some members of the Vatican clergy, expressing skepticism about the propriety of housing an animal within the Pope's private quarters. Concerns about distraction from essential duties and deviations from protocol were murmured. Pope Francis, hearing of this unease, addressed it not with edicts, but with his characteristic gentle touch. The story recounts how he simply invited the concerned individuals to meet the animal. Upon entering, they found the cat resting peacefully, asleep on the Pope's lap, a picture of tranquility that seemingly silenced their criticisms on the spot. One visitor was even moved to silently stroke the sleeping feline. Life with the cat continued, occasionally intersecting with formal routines in unexpected ways. During one intimate mass, as Francis spoke about compassion, the cat reportedly slipped between curtains and let out a loud meow. While some faces showed discomfort, the Pope smoothly improvised, remarking that the little one served only to remind them that even the most vulnerable have something to say. The comment reportedly drew smiles, dissolving the tension and warming the atmosphere. For several days, however, the cat remained nameless. When asked, Francis simply replied, "He hasn't told me yet," reflecting a belief that names hold significance and should emerge organically from the developing bond, rather than being simply imposed. That moment of discovery arrived during a visit from a group of sick children and their families. A young boy named Emilio, frail but with a tender smile, approached the unnamed cat and asked its name. Crouching beside him, Francis explained the cat didn't have one yet and invited the boy to bestow one. Without much hesitation, Emilio replied, "His name is Pio, like my grandfather who is already in heaven." The simple, profound connection, linking the small cat to a beloved family member and the hope of eternity, deeply moved the Pope. From that day forward, the cat was Pio. The name seemed to settle upon him perfectly, fitting his quiet, respectful, yet undeniably present nature. It carried a weight, a sense of gentle dignity. Even the most reserved cardinals began using the name, acknowledging the almost sacred feeling surrounding the gesture. Pio was no longer just a rescued stray, he was becoming an accepted presence, a silent symbol of tenderness and burgeoning hope within the Vatican walls. Now named and fully integrated into the Pope's life, Pio's influence began to extend beyond just being a companion, embarking on his own quiet ministry. Pio's quiet ministry, comfort, character, and connection. Now firmly established within the papal apartments and graced with the name Pio, the small gray cat began to demonstrate a unique influence that extended far beyond simply being the Pope's companion. He seemed to embody a quiet ministry all his own, possessing an uncanny intuition for sensing emotional needs. Visitors to Pope Francis, whether high-ranking dignitaries or humble pilgrims, might find Pio suddenly beside them, offering a silent, non-judgmental presence. The narrative suggests he instinctively chose those who most needed comfort, settling near them, offering a soft purr, or even unexpectedly climbing onto a lap, a furry ambassador of solace in the often formal Vatican environment. Life with Pio, however, wasn't solely predictable moments of quiet comfort, it also included flashes of typical feline character, which Pope Francis reportedly handled with grace and gentle humor. One anecdote tells of an afternoon meeting with an important spiritual leader from another denomination. Mid-discussion, Pio apparently leaped onto the Pope's lap and, perhaps startled or simply asserting his presence, delivered a noticeable scratch to Francis's hand. A moment of stunned silence likely fell over the room, the breach of decorum palpable. Yet, Francis calmly took a handkerchief, tended to the small wound, and lightened the mood with a self-deprecating quip, "He has character, like me when I was young." Laughter reportedly dissolved the tension, turning potential awkwardness into a shared human moment. On another occasion, a different kind of minor chaos ensued. While working at his desk, Pope Francis discovered one of his significant official documents had mysteriously vanished. After a brief search, the missing manuscript was found, not lost, but carefully rolled up and tucked under Pio's makeshift bed. Rather than expressing frustration, Francis is said to have smiled and remarked with gentle irony, "I think the Holy Spirit is trying to tell me to get some rest." These incidents painted a picture of Pio not just as a comfort animal, but as a distinct personality, fully integrated into the Pope's life, quirks and all. Perhaps the most profound example of Pio's quiet ministry involved a young seminarian named Thomas. Pope Francis reportedly found Thomas sitting alone in an inner corridor, his face clouded with despair. Sensing the young man's turmoil, Francis sat beside him wordlessly. After a moment of shared silence, Thomas confessed his struggle, a deep crisis of faith. "Your Holiness, I don't know if I believe in God. There is so much darkness in the world and in me." Instead of offering complex theological arguments, Francis chose a different path. Standing up, he looked the seminarian in the eye and simply said, "Come, I want to introduce you to someone." He led Thomas to his office, where Pio was sleeping peacefully near a window. Francis shared Pio's own story, arriving wounded, terrified, lacking trust in humans, yet eventually healing and finding safety. "And now," Francis explained, "I can't imagine my days without him." Overcome with emotion perhaps triggered by this simple story of resilience, Thomas slowly knelt beside the cat and began to weep. Pio, sensing the distress, reportedly stood, approached Thomas, and gently rested his head on the young man's leg. This simple, unmediated gesture of connection seemed to bypass intellect and touch Thomas's heart directly, breaking through the armor of his doubt and pain. In the days that followed, Thomas made a habit of visiting Pio each morning, talking to him, brushing his fur. Silently, organically, something within the young seminarian began to yield. Pope Francis observed this from a distance, understanding that pathways to faith and healing are diverse. Sometimes, a quiet look, a gentle purr, a silent, trusting presence can communicate more profoundly than any sermon, reminding a struggling soul that trust is still possible. Pio's comforting presence wasn't confined to private moments. Soon, his story and the lessons he embodied began to ripple outwards, reaching a wider audience and sparking new conversations. Whispers and declarations, the heaven statement and its echoes. As Pio's comforting presence became more established within the Vatican, weaving its way through personal encounters and quiet moments of healing, the story of the Pope's unassuming feline companion inevitably began to seep beyond the apostolic palace walls. News about the Pope's cat started appearing discreetly in religious media outlets and on devotional websites. For some, it was a sweet, humanizing curiosity. For others, perhaps steeped in more rigid traditions, it represented an unnecessary distraction from the weightier matters of faith and governance. Yet, for Pope Francis, seemingly every small act of love held transformative potential. The narrative suggests that, perhaps sensing the growing interest or simply moved by his own experiences, Francis decided to subtly incorporate the theme of love for all creatures into a homily. His comments were reportedly nuanced, emphasizing how animals reflect the Creator's love and teach humans about unconditional affection and listening with the heart. However, nuance is often the first casualty in the rapid churn of media cycles. Several outlets apparently replicated his words, but in ways that amplified or distorted the original sentiment. Headlines began to appear, some boldly claiming the Pope had declared that animals possess souls, igniting a flurry of reaction across social media platforms and sparking renewed theological debate. A complex discussion within Catholicism that lacks definitive dogma regarding the eternal destiny of individual animals. Faced with this burgeoning controversy, the story recounts Francis taking a characteristically direct approach. He reportedly called an impromptu press conference. In a scene vividly painted by the narrative, he appeared before journalists holding Pio calmly in his arms. It was then, according to this account, that he delivered one of the most memorable and debated statements attributed to his pontificate: "Our animals will go to heaven with us." The narrative emphasizes the delivery, firm yet gentle, presented not as a rigid dogmatic declaration, but as a heartfelt testimony of faith and love. A profound silence is said to have followed, more potent than applause. This reported statement, whether accurately captured or dramatically embellished in the retelling, caused an immediate worldwide impact. Many pet owners felt immense comfort, finding solace in the idea that their beloved companions might accompany them into eternity. Others responded with skepticism or even mockery, viewing it as overly sentimental or theologically unfounded. Online discussions raged, parsing the meaning and implications. Yet, the narrative suggests Francis wasn't aiming for universal approval but sought rather to touch the hearts of those open to a message rooted in love's universality. "Where there is true love, there is God," he reportedly added during that encounter. Confused by the headlines and seeking doctrinal clarity, some of the faithful sent letters asking for detailed explanations. Was this official teaching? Was it truly possible according to established doctrine? Francis is said to have responded to several of these inquiries personally, writing simply in blue ink on plain paper. His replies, as recounted, gently steered away from theological pronouncements. "It wasn't a theological promise," he reportedly wrote, "but rather a hope that unites us, because heaven is the place where love dwells, and if you loved, you will not be alone." This focus on hope in the unifying power of love, rather than strict doctrinal lines, resonated deeply. Simultaneously, images of the Pope affectionately caressing Pio flooded social media, further amplifying the story. Instead of overshadowing his papal authority, these images seemed to enhance his relatability, showcasing a profound humanity. People perhaps previously distant from the Church found themselves drawn to his words, moved by the simple, powerful gesture of his bond with Pio. The Vatican reportedly received thousands of messages that week from individuals inspired by Francis's example to adopt stray animals themselves. This message of love, however controversial or debated its specific articulation might have been, clearly struck a chord, rippling outwards in unexpected ways. Bridges of compassion, connection across distance and adversity. The connections fostered by Pio's presence weren't limited by proximity. The narrative speaks of tendrils of compassion reaching across oceans, seemingly weaving an invisible thread between Rome and Mexico. Amidst the daily flood of correspondence arriving at the Vatican, one letter, penned in the shaky handwriting of an 8-year-old girl named Mariana from a children's hospital in Guadalajara, was reportedly misplaced, resting unseen on a forgotten shelf for weeks. When Pope Francis eventually discovered it while sorting papers, its simple, heartfelt plea stopped him in his tracks. Mariana wrote about her own beloved cat, Capito, who was gravely ill. "My mom says there's nothing left to do, but I think there is," she wrote, asking the Pope for prayers and adding, "He loves you, Mariana." Deeply touched, Francis didn't delegate the response. He took paper and pen and wrote back personally, sharing words of comfort and solidarity. "Dear Mariana," his letter began, "here in Rome I have a friend named Pio. He was also very ill, but love healed him. I'm sure your little snowflake, Capito, knows how much you love him. I will pray for him." With the letter, he enclosed a small, tangible piece of that hope, a little blanket that Pio himself used to sleep with. The package took 3 days to arrive. By then, Mariana, consumed by sadness, had reportedly fallen into a coma. Her mother, moved by the Pope's extraordinary gesture, read the letter aloud to her unconscious daughter while placing the small blanket over her. That very night, in a turn of events doctors struggled to explain medically, Mariana opened her eyes, whispering about her little snowflake being better. Tears flowed freely. Her mother attributed it simply to love, traveling faster than any medicine. Entreatingly, the story notes that during these same days back in Rome, Pio behaved unusually, lethargic, refusing food, gazing intently out the window as if waiting. When Francis later took him to a restored garden area, Pio suddenly revived, running and playing among the flowers. "Sometimes souls connect from a distance," Francis reportedly murmured, watching in wonder. Two hearts, an ocean apart, had seemingly touched through shared love and a small cat's blanket. Life within the Vatican walls also presented its own adversities, testing resilience closer to home. Pope Francis himself began to experience periods of increasing fatigue, prompting doctors to insist on rest. Reluctantly agreeing, he retreated somewhat, spending hours in his chambers reading the Psalms, with Pio a constant, comforting presence curled up on his lap. These days of forced quiet reportedly reconnected him with his own fragility and a sense of peace often obscured by his demanding responsibilities. Then came a literal storm, a fierce tempest that lashed Rome, illuminating the Vatican gardens with dramatic flashes of lightning. The following day brought news that a section of the garden, an area where Pio often played, had collapsed under the deluge. Francis asked to see the damage. Contemplating the destroyed earth, he remained silent for a few minutes before declaring with quiet resolve, "We will rebuild together." He then organized a small brigade, volunteers, gardeners, even a few Swiss guards, and worked alongside them, hands in the soil, replanting flowers, clearing branches, repairing paths. Pio watched the proceedings from a nearby rock, a silent observer of the community effort. At day's end, Francis scooped him up, whispering, "We're okay, aren't we?" The deepest challenge to their bond, however, came when Pio himself fell gravely ill. Days later, he woke weak, refusing food, unwilling to move. Francis took the frail cat tenderly into his arms, spending hours beside him, praying silently, not for grand miracles, the narrative suggests, but simply for companionship in suffering. Sadness enveloped the Pope, yet he refused despair. For 2 nights, he reportedly barely slept, taking turns with attending physicians to watch over his small friend. Then, just as dawn broke on the 3rd day, Pio raised his head, offered a soft purr, and rested his body against the Pope's chest, a sigh of return. The recovery was slow, but steady, with Francis accompanying him patiently, like a devoted father. "You're closer to heaven than I am, and yet you choose to stay," he murmured later, between smiles and tears. Their bond, tested by shared vulnerability and strengthened by dedicated care, had endured, weaving yet another thread into the invisible web of hope surrounding them. These experiences, both joyful and challenging, continued to shape the quiet lessons Pio imparted. Lessons in simplicity, faith, fear, and finding the sacred. These experiences, demonstrating connection across distance and resilience through adversity, seemed only to deepen the unique bond between Pope Francis and Pio, further cementing the cat's role as more than just a pet but as a living parable within the Vatican. As the months passed, Francis began integrating Pio's presence more overtly into his reflections, occasionally sharing insights reportedly gleaned from his feline companion. He might mention of "Lo friend who has taught me more about God than many books," or observe that mercy is also learned on 4 legs and 2 eyes full of trust. Naturally, this continued emphasis on animal companionship didn't sit comfortably with everyone. The narrative recounts an audience requested by one of the stricter bishops, concerned that the focus was straying from core doctrinal issues. "Holiness," the bishop reportedly began, "the people need spiritual guidance, not animal stories." Francis listened patiently, without interruption, before posing a gentle, probing question in response. "What if I told you that more and more people are coming to God every day because they've heard this story? What is more Christian? A perfect chair or a heart that believes again?" The reported silence that followed suggested the question hit its mark. Pio's disarming influence often manifested in encounters with ordinary visitors. When a group of children from a rural school toured the Vatican, one tearfully expressed disappointment that the Pope's famous kitten wasn't visible. Francis reportedly took the child's hands, looked at him tenderly, and suggested, "Maybe he's just hiding." As if on cue, leading them to the garden, Pio emerged elegantly from the plants, settling calmly amidst the delighted children. The resulting scene, the Pope sitting on the grass, surrounded by laughing children and a peacefully resting cat, was captured in a photograph that quickly went viral, showcasing an image of warmth and accessibility. Yet, Pio's presence could also facilitate deeper, more personal healing. A nun working in the Vatican kitchen confessed to Francis a lifelong fear of cats, something that made her deeply nervous. Instead of dismissing her fear, Francis compassionately accompanied her to where Pio was sleeping. He sat with her, simply asking her to watch. As if sensing the situation, Pio slowly approached, lay down at the nun's feet, and purred. Overwhelmed, she began to cry, admitting, "I've never felt safe around one." After that transformative encounter, the sister reportedly began feeding Pio each morning, even talking to him. She later confessed to the Pope how she learned to see tenderness where only fear existed before, marveling that an animal could heal broken memories. These quiet encounters became a powerful, unspoken testimony to the lessons Pio seemed to embody, lessons not easily taught in books, but lived through action and presence. It became clear, even if unstated, that Pio represented something deeper, a living message of sacred simplicity. Heaven is where love is, the enduring message of Pope Francis and Pio. These quiet lessons in simplicity, faith, and finding the sacred in unexpected corners culminated, the story suggests, in a poignant public moment as the year drew to a close. St. Peter's Square was reportedly filled with the faithful gathered for the final Massachusetts. As Pope Francis ascended the altar, prepared homily in hand, his gaze is said to have fallen upon Pio, sitting unobtrusively somewhere nearby, perhaps between the steps, a silent, furry witness to the solemn proceedings. In that instant, a decision was seemingly made. Francis gently set aside his prepared papers, took a breath, and spoke from the heart, his voice clear and resonant across the vast square. He reiterated the message that had woven itself through his experiences with his small companion, a truth learned not from theological treatises but from lived compassion. "The love we give does not disappear," he declared, according to this telling. "Our animals will go to heaven with us, because heaven is where true love is, and they have taught us that better than anyone." The narrative describes the square erupting not just in applause, but in a wave of raw emotion. Tears flowed, smiles broke out, a reaction less to doctrine and more to the affirmation of a profound truth many already felt deep within their own hearts regarding the bonds they shared with their own beloved animals. Following the Mass, Pope Francis reportedly stepped down from the altar, approached Pio, and gently took the cat into his arms, lifting him slightly. The gesture, as depicted, held no air of grandeur or spectacle. Rather, it was an act of simple, profound humility, a visual testament to the connection shared. For a moment, the world watching felt that perhaps heaven wasn't such a distant, abstract concept, but something closer, something potentially already begun here on earth wherever true, unconditional love resides. Ultimately, the enduring story of Pope Francis and Pio serves as a powerful reminder that genuine miracles often manifest not in earth-shattering events, but in the quiet, everyday gestures of kindness and compassion. Whether taking in a stray, respecting the creatures who share our world, or simply offering a gentle touch, the narrative underscores a central theme of Francis's papacy: every life matters, and love, even in its smallest, furriest forms, carries an eternal weight. It encourages reflection on the nature of the human-animal bond and the ways unconditional love, in its purest forms, can teach, heal, and elevate the human spirit, offering a glimpse of grace in a complex world.